thank you for joining us tonight for Water as Inspiration, Art in Casco Bay. Hi, I'm Will Everett, Executive Director at Friends of Casco Bay. Our mission is to improve and protect the environmental health of Casco Bay. We appreciate each of you being here tonight. My job tonight is to introduce staff writer Robby Lewis-Nash, who's going to facilitate our event. Now, I'm really excited about this event. Why are we focused on protecting the health of coastal waters? Because Casco Bay is a special place. We're drawn to it. We go to visit the sea to find ourselves. It's our home. It's where we find strength and solace. Going to our coastal waters is where we find inspiration. Tonight, you will hear three very different artists talk about how they are inspired by water. We'll touch on the connections between art, climate change, and action. To the artists, Dibble, Mitchell Rasor, and Jan Piribeck, many thanks to all three of you for sharing your art and passions with us tonight. Leading us on this journey tonight is our very own Robby Lewis-Nash, our staff writer. Robby joined our staff during the heart of the pandemic. And so many of you may not have seen or met him. So let me share a little bit about him. And what you may know is that Robby is a great writer. You may know that he has made most of the videos that we share on our website. In fact, he is a licensed drone pilot. What you might not know about Robby is that he graduated some time ago from Oberlin College, where he double majored in art and biology. In fact, I'm showing you a few examples of his work right now on the screen. And let me make sure I am doing that. And so Robby, as I share your art, come on screen. Friends of Casco Bay, I give you Robby Lewis-Nash.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Will, for that kind introduction. Yes, we're looking over here at some of my ceramics. But I'm Robby Lewis-Nash, staff writer at Friends of Casco Bay. And at this point, I'd like to invite our panelists on screen. You can see them popping in and out just now, actually. We have Mitchell Rasor, Jan Piribeck, and Anna Dibble. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Good to see everybody.
Hello. So tonight, we're going to get to ask some questions of our artist panelists. But first, I want to introduce them and hear a little bit about their work. So first off tonight, we're going to hear from Anna Dibble. Anna is a visual artist and writer. Many of her paintings feature water and explore themes of nature and how we as humans relate to it. Anna is also the founding director of Gulf of Maine Eco Arts, a project that brings together artists and scientists in collaboration to create work that reconnects people to the natural world. Gulf of Maine Eco Arts has an exhibit on view right now at the Maine Maritime Museum. It's called Sea Change, Darkness and Light in the Gulf of Maine. I recommend you get up to Bath and check that out. After hearing from Anna, we're going to turn to Mitchell. Mitchell is an artist, a landscape architect, and assistant professor at the Maine College of Art. His work has been widely recognized for achievements in many areas, including art, urban design, waterfront revitalization, and climate change resiliency. In addition to all of those parts of his practice, Mitchell is also the 2023 Royal River Conservation Trust Artist in Residence, where he draws and documents the Trust's conserved ecosystems, which I would note are all in the Casco Bay watershed. And we are also joined by Jan Piribeck. Jan is an artist and emerita professor of art at the University of Southern Maine. One of her current projects is Maine Greenland Collaborations. It's an interdisciplinary project that integrates art with the social and natural sciences to explore changing ecosystems in coastal Maine and Greenland. You'll hear more about that project from Jan today, and specifically how it relates to Long Island right here in Casco Bay. And so with those introductions, I would like to ask all of our panelists, except for Anna, to step off screen, and I will hand the microphone over to Anna.
Hi. Here we are. Good. Hello, everybody, and thanks for signing up for this event. And thanks to Friends of Casco Bay for inviting me to be part of this this webinar. This title that I put in the slideshow reflects my kind of main approach to life in general, which is something I think about all the time, and how far human beings have been disconnected from what we call the natural world for a very long period of time. And I think of it as one of the main reasons that we're in the trouble we're in with the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. Transformation through collaboration is using the arts to try to reconnect people with the wild through art, and my personal art is trying to do that, but especially this exhibit that I started, this project 4 years ago, which I'll talk about later. Next slide, please. I moved to Maine 8 years ago, and my artwork started changing. I lived in Portland, and I could see Casco Bay from where I lived. It was a tiny little place. I could see the water from where I lived. It was tiny, but I could smell the ocean, and I could hear the foghorns at night, and that really started influencing my painting. And at that time, there was a series of articles that came out in the Portland Press Herald by Colin Woodard that were based on the fact that the Gulf was warming faster than most of the oceans in the world. And that is something that has influenced and driven my work, in both my personal work and my project from that time on. You can turn to the next slide, please. This is an example of something that's in a painting in my recent series. For the past 8 years, it's an evolving series. I work intuitively, so I don't have any set ideas when I start out. I'm following my long experience with painting and the materials, and then I kind of surprise myself. And these boats with these creatures and people in them started showing up in the paintings, and I liked them, and I started following them. It became kind of a thread. And I looked at them, and I think what they're about, I'm not sure, but I think so, is about how we're in deep trouble. We're losing parts of our ecosystem every single day, and we're not facing that enough. And yet we're still searching for hope. We're still searching for solutions and answers to our questions. And that's what I think this is about in a symbolic way. You can go to the next slide. This is actually one of my latest paintings. This is just called Chaos, which is kind of a self-explanatory. You can go to the next slide. In 2018, I had an idea for a large-scale collaborative art project, and I had heard that at Bigelow Lab for Ocean Sciences up in East Boothbay, they liked working with artists. So I drove up there, and I met with Stephen Profizer, who's the communications director there. And I sat at a table with him, and I just had this crazy idea. I just said, I'd love to curate a group of artists to put together and make a large-scale sculpture installation based on what's going on underneath the waves in the Gulf, underneath the waves in Casco Bay, that people don't usually see, so that they can understand that they are part of this ecosystem, that these creatures and these plants are all our neighbors. And he went for it, surprisingly, and we started the project. So you can go to the next slide. It was a 3-year project. It included a pandemic, so that was very challenging for the fundraising and organization, but we persevered. We ended up working with 16 schools, elementary through college levels, Bigelow scientists, and a team of 7 artists who made all the decisions. I sort of operated the rudder, but our group that would meet on Zoom made all the decisions. You can go to the next one. And in September 2021, we installed Majestic Fragility, which was our exhibit at the Bigelow Lab. It's a beautiful building up there, and this was a spectacular exhibit that was up there for a year. You can't see the whole thing because we could never take a photograph of it. It was too large, but this is part of Andy Rosen's whale, North Atlantic right whale sculpture. Joe Hemis did some enlarged comb jellies. Pamela Moulton, Ghost Gear, Lee Chisholm and I made birds. It was just this wonderful amalgamation of representing what goes on underneath the waves. Next slide. Last January, we started working with Maine Maritime Museum and planning a much larger, more ambitious exhibit. We worked with 8 college interns who we paid, and there were 4 artists that did all the planning this time. We worked all the way through 2022. We made a lot of artwork and had a lot of conversations. Next slide. And in February 3rd of this year, we opened it's an immersive art installation called Sea Change, Darkness and Light in the Gulf of Maine. It has a narrative, it has a number of rooms, it has a lot of artwork and also information about the science, and a wonderful soundtrack with the whales and the sounds from underneath the waves. It's so you can feel as if you're actually underwater there. So I hope you all get to see it. Last slide. It'll be open throughout this year. There's a lot of very good programming, and you can just check our websites for that. I put them up in the chat, so you can see those afterwards. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Anna. And I guess I would just add that for the folks at Bigelow who approved your project, I wouldn't say it's any surprise. Your work's amazing. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'd like to invite Mitchell on screen. And Mitchell, you are up next. Anna, let's you and me hop off screen.
All right, does that look good?
That looks great.
Oh, great. I'm really pleased to be here. Casco Bay has been a really important part of my life since the mid-90s, and engages all my senses and my intellect. And so today I want to talk a little about my sort of daily drawing practice and how that connects me to the place, especially the salt marshes and estuaries of Casco Bay. But I also want to just talk a little bit about some of my other types of work I'm involved with around the Bay. And so it's like a full body workout for me in terms of all the different ways I really engage with this place. I am an assistant professor at Mecca, and we really use Casco Bay as sort of a classroom. I'm a landscape architect and urban designer, and the work over the years has really evolved around waterfronts throughout Maine and New England. And especially, I've been really fortunate to work on a lot of projects providing access and water quality related issues to Casco Bay in and around Portland. So it's really an important part of sort of my daily routine is really strongly tied in with Casco Bay. And one project I wanted to sort of point out that I've currently been working on the last few years and sort of give a little shout out is up in Booth Bay Harbor. I've been working with a nonprofit group to take this former hotel site and actually turn back the clock a little bit and turn it into a permanent park and working waterfront. And this project's underway, under construction. And you can go visit now if you want to up in East Side in Booth Bay Harbor. A project I've been working on since the mid-90s at the invitation of Robert Smithson's widow, Nancy Holt, is I've been going up to Pleasant Bay, way down east, to visit Little Fort Island and record there, document that place. And I'm currently working on a number of related projects to this site, including sort of an ambient album related to that. But that sort of gets us to Robert Smithson here a little bit, because we're talking about environmental art and art history. And so looking at sort of this role of sort of environmental art and sort of the environment and climate, we have these artists we look back to sort of from like the early 70s, people like Christo, and we were sort of exploring that. Climate change wasn't even really discussed about then, even though Earth Day is in April 1970. But we see these iconic images, these major earthworks that were happening, major sort of interventions. This is Christo 69 in Australia. But then we jump forward to today, and here's this image just taken in the Alps you know, and here they are trying to wrap this glacier in white. So it's like a Christo piece to reduce the melt. So, you know, it's interesting how these are. So I sort of sometimes wonder if like climate change is our sort of best self-portrait. It's like this destructive self-portrait, sort of something along the lines of Dorian Gray, the picture of Dorian Gray. So that gets us to this idea of like, you know, how do we negotiate with this climate here and these places, and this is something that grounds me, and that so those larger existential conversations is sort of my daily relationship and my daily practice of being in these marshes and on the bay and looking at these marks that are there. This is a salt pan that looks very much like sort of like a human intervention. And how do we discuss these places? How do we draw them? And for me, so drawing these places and repeating these drawings over and over, you know, thousands of drawings over the years, you know, is a way for me to look at it, you know, seasonally, daily, tidal cycles. You know, I can sort of measure my aging body against this place. You know, I can register my body against the marks in these salt marshes. And in many ways, salt marshes to me are sort of like these continual drawings. They're these places that are sort of changing. They're sort of on a daily basis changing and drawing themselves, and you can sort of witness that as you watch the tides coming in and out. And so for me to be there, it's a way to sort of ground myself in my sort of appreciation of this place and sort of situate myself in a moment, that moment then also sort of speaks to sort of these greater issues we're worrying about. And then, so, you know, being able to witness these places and sort of be there is, you know, a real important part of what I do every day, and really sort of infuses and enriches my life and enriches all the great memories and my concerns about Casco Bay and the marshes. And again, marshes are also these places to me that are exciting because they're sort of these like non-binary places. They're not sea, they're not land. They're sort of this, you know, fluxscape, this mediated dialectical landscape that's, you know, really feeds us and is a beautiful sort of subtle place that is all about change all the time. And so it's constantly reminding us of change and how we sort of have to negotiate that change on a daily basis. And some of these are watercolors. I actually just use the water right from the salt marshes as I'm sort of drawing and working on that day. And some of these drawings are just from the recent days, but they're a real way for me to sort of be there and be present. And as I also say, though, you know, this one of my favorite places, and some of the drawings you just saw are at this marsh right here in Cousins River in Yarmouth. And just a couple months ago, it was posted that I can't draw there anymore. And I had lengthy conversations with the landowner, and he will not let me draw there. So, you know, so we're dealing with access. We're doing sort of these like daily human foibles of, you know, property ownership while we're trying to negotiate major existential threats like climate change and the eel grass beds, you know, shrinking. So it's an important place, and I'm glad so many people care about it. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mitchell. Yeah, I think as we noted before the event, that that last photo you shared and thinking about access to the bay is just such an issue for so many folks, whether you're someone who's going there to draw or simply to just enjoy this place that we all live. But that definitely hits home when you're thinking about, oh, this is a place you've been able to draw for, you were saying, multiple decades, right?
Yeah, since the 90s.
Yeah, yes, things are certainly changing without a doubt, climate included.
Yeah.
I'd like to invite Jan on for our final presentation. Jan, I'll step off screen and you can take it away.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to 2019 to a public walk that I led that was, it was offered in conjunction with two larger projects. And the first one was called Platform Projects Walks, Ecologies of the Local. And that project consisted of 8 artist-led walks and an exhibition at Speedwell Projects, which is a contemporary art venue located in Portland. And that whole project was curated by Julie Poitras-Santos. And then the second project, the second larger project that this walk, which was called Long Island Drift, anyway, it was connected to Maine Greenland Collaborations, which is an interdisciplinary project that studies the impacts of ecological change on coastal communities in Maine and Greenland. And Robbie mentioned that before, and that's something that I'm really involved in right now. And that project is an initiative of the Maine North Atlantic Institute at the University of Southern Maine. So just to give a little bit of a context, Long Island is a small island that's located in Casco Bay, and it's home to about 200 people year-round. And this number swells to 1,000 plus of part-time residents that live there during the summer months and maybe into the fall. And the island is about 3 miles long and it's about 1 mile wide. And the town of Long Island was established in 1993 after seceding from the city of Portland. So the residents who live there, they're very independent, and they really value the waters of Casco Bay for its beauty, and also because it provides resources for many of the people who live there, who have made livelihoods out of fishing and now even like aquaponics. And so this is a photo of Fowler's Beach. And that is a public beach that is owned by the Long Island Civic Association. And this is a really it's a vulnerable area of the island because it's the topography is low. It's low lying. So it's subject to sea level rise and a kind of gradual erosion of the beach there. And Fowler's Beach was the destination for the Long Island Drift Walk. So next slide, Sarah. Walking has a history as an art form, and so it's through walking we can really experience the aesthetics of the landscape, and it can also be a community practice. When people walk in groups, it brings people together to connect with one another and to connect with the environment. And it's been said, and there's been a lot of writing about walking as a means for connecting the body with the mind. And the well-known author Rebecca Solnit points out in her book Wanderlust that philosophers such as Rousseau and Kierkegaard and the poet William Wordsworth, they used walking to think, and Wordsworth composed while walking. And Solnit also calls attention to walking as pilgrimage. So I thought of this public walk that we did on Long Island as an aesthetic journey and also as a pilgrimage to Fowler's Beach, which is a site of ecological significance and a site of ecological change. Next slide, please. So 20 walkers participated, and we started out at Mariner's Wharf, which is where the Casco Bay ferry lines drops you off. And the walk was divided into small groups because it was still COVID. And these groups departed in intervals to keep distance from one another. And these were mostly people from off the island, mostly people from the mainland. And there were a couple of people from who actually live on Long Island. And then we provided blue masks as a protective measure against COVID and to kind of color coordinate everything. And then the walkers were asked to develop a human chain and keep their distance of being like 6 feet apart on the shoreline. And then they were guided by me through 2 1-minute silent contemplations. And in the first contemplation, we faced the water, and I sounded the bell, which marked the beginnings and endings of this minute of silence. And so that when we were facing the water, we were contemplating the impacts of sea level rise on the local shorelines. And then we reversed and looked towards the town. And we did a 1-minute contemplation on sea level rise and its impact on local communities. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. So the whole idea of this was to observe the arrival and the impact of this, what was a really high tide that day. It wasn't exactly a king tide, but it was very high. And then each participant was invited to submit a visual and verbal response about their experiences of the island and about their experiences of the tide. And that tide arrived at about 1:03 p.m. and it peaked at about 11.2 feet. And, you know, this walk was informed by data from Maine Geological Survey and Portland Tidal Gauge. And the walk itself, though, provided an opportunity for us, the people who took the walk, to collect data in the way that artists do, which is through the body, through the senses. And next slide, please. And so this is a collage done by my colleague and fellow collaborator on the Maine Greenland project. And this is Paula Gerstenblatt's collage, and it was her response to walking and drifting on Long Island. So this is one of the responses. And Paula is an artist and social worker and professor at USM. And in addition to doing her own studio work, she led a collage portraiture workshop out on Long Island to help us in this Maine Greenland project, to help us build relationships and on the island there and better understand the lived experiences of people who actually live there. And so our intention is to go back to Long Island and do more of this work and combine the treks or the walks with the collage workshop, and also to go to South Greenland this summer and do the same thing, so that people have an opportunity to get out and experience sites of ecological significance, and then come back and process that experience so that it's more deeply embedded in their memory bank. Next slide. So that's what I have for today, basically. And I think I do have a website for the Long Island Drift project and for the Maine Greenland project. There is another website for that. And I just want to thank Robby, and it's great to be here with Anna and Mitchell and everybody. And thanks to Friends of Casco Bay for organizing this panel and for all the great work that you do.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, Jan. Yeah, I'll invite all of our panelists back on screen now. Yes, here everyone comes. Great. Yeah, and Jan, just to touch on the end of your presentation there, I think for so many of our members, folks are pretty familiar with the Bay, but thinking about, you know, visiting Long Island via the ferry and arriving there and walking as an art form might be a new concept to a lot of people. And that was just an exciting thing to hear about. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Before I get into a couple of panel questions for everyone, I just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to do a Q&A really soon. And when we do, you will try and get through as many of your questions as you can. So just as they pop in your head, write them in the chat and we will get back to them. So for our panelists, the first question that I want to ask you all tonight, and I'd like to start with you, Jan, is if you could just talk a little bit more about your connection to water specifically and to Casco Bay. How does water and the Bay inform your art and your practice?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I live in East Bayside in Portland, which floods regularly. And that's how I started to really get interested in water, actually. I mean, even though I'm surrounded by water, you know, living on the peninsula, the water from Back Cove was actually inundating my neighborhood. And so that led me to think more about, you know, the Back Cove is an estuary. And then it led me to kayak out into Casco Bay. And then being in Casco Bay, I started to think about Casco Bay being situated in the Gulf of Maine, and then further out into the Atlantic Ocean, and then up into Greenland and the North Pole, and like, what's happening here? You know, like Anna mentioned, with the waters warming, it's like, how are all these water bodies connected? And of course, there's a huge mystery to the ocean, and it's just so compelling. And so, I mean, that's just a little bit of it.
Awesome, thank you. Anna or Mitch, either of you, feel free to jump in on that question.
I'll say something. I mean, I spent most of my life in Vermont, which didn't have an ocean, but I spent a lot of time in rivers, and they were a very important part of my childhood and adulthood. And then I moved. One of the main reasons I moved here was to be closer to the ocean. And you know, as I said when I was talking earlier, my whole ideas for my work that I've been doing now for 8 years, and I'll continue to do, came from being right next to Casco Bay and taking walks on the shore with my dogs. And also over in South Portland and Willard Beach. And they just it really fed my imagination, and they continue to. And it's the water. I mean, it's amazing.
And I have like a real, like everyone else, sort of a real personal and professional connection. You know, the Casco Bay is where, you know, I've been sailing since the 90s. It's where my kids learned to swim. It's, you know, some of my most fundamental adult memories are, you know, swimming with my kids in places like Madeline Point. And so, you know, it's a real, and up until recently, I swam year round every day of the year. So it's, you know, it's I have a real personal connection with the place. And then professionally, you know, I've been sort of planning and working with communities really in a detailed way for many decades now in terms of water quality, access, working waterfront, you know, sea level rise, master planning, you know, all these big infrastructure issues, questions. So, you know, I've been really fascinated with like how much I love this place, and then sort of in my professional life, how do we deal with water quality? How do we mitigate sort of development and create a sort of, you know, the most sustainable model we can to, you know, to be on this bay and to be in this place. So yeah, it's a, you know, real deep personal and sort of intellectual connection at the same time.
Definitely. My next question for you all is, there's a little bit of framing here. So the question overall is just, what does art have to do with climate change and the environment? But being someone who works at Friends of Casco Bay, I find myself thinking about how there are all sorts of scientists, activists, politicians, and organizations like Friends of Casco Bay that work on climate and environmental issues. And I guess what I'm wondering is, from your perspective, are there things that artists or art can communicate, or can it build connections in ways that those people or professions cannot with respect to the environment and climate change? And Anna, do you want to start off with this one? I know it's
Sure.
It's a big question.
Sure. I'll just focus on a little part of it. I mean, the just basic thing is that the arts, they communicate with people through the senses and through emotions, which science doesn't really do, or kind of environmental treatises or talk. So there's that connection. But I found especially with working with this, putting together this collaborative over the last 4 years of you know, just so many different people, from artists to scientists to educators, that there was kind of a magic in working together like that, and that the actual working on a subject that had to do with the environment, that had to do with the water, that had to do with everybody's who was connected to this, had this concern that Mitchell was just talking about that he has, and I think we all have that in itself, I found to be a really powerful way of working with the arts and the environment. And I think that it would be great if there were a lot more smaller and larger organizations that were started, like what Jan's doing, what you know, there are, but I think there could be even more, because I think that getting people to do hands-on work, getting involved in an activist way and finding their particular way of doing some kind of advocacy and stewardship is the answer, and not just armchair kind of, oh, I'm concerned about this, that it's action. So.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, Mitchell, Jan, do either of you want to jump in on that question?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, right, it's a hard thing, right? Because the environment, climate change, is sort of like huge abstractions, right? And they're hard to sort of put our arms around them. We don't really have the language to talk about them. And Robby, we talked a little about Timothy Morton, hyper objects and things like that, and trying to understand that. So it's, you know, so hopefully art in a way can take these abstractions and sort of find these conduits. You know, we haven't had like it's hard to believe, but I don't think the environmental movement, the sort of climate movement really has had like its moment yet that's been super galvanizing nationally. That's really like seared us. You'd think we would have had that many times already, but we just really hasn't really happened. I don't know what that would have to be. And that type of moment, that sort of zeitgeist moment, you know, hopefully we're sort of working our way around it right now, and the arts and conversations, you know, we can start to, you know, develop that sort of articulation and the language to try to communicate this, and take that, like you were saying, take the science and translate that to sort of a common language.
I was thinking about Joseph Beuys lately. For those of you who may not be familiar with his work, he was a German artist, very prominent German artist, who made this, one of his credos was that, you know, everyone is an artist. And when you really stop and think about that, that doesn't really necessarily mean that everybody's out doing watercolors or something. I think really what it means is that it's more, he also talked about social sculpture. What it means is that we're all shaping our environment, whether we're actively doing that or even if we're passive, we're still shaping what happens in the world, even if, you know, we're not contributing. And so art can be like an invocation. It can be like an invitation to like think and feel and decide what kind of world we want. And I think that the work of artists, you know, I mean, I look at well, the work of both Anna and Mitchell, and, you know, the Cassius Ledge piece that's part of the Eco Arts project at the Maine Maritime Museum. That's really asking, what are we going to do with this? And Mitchell, the work that you do, you know, with the landscape and architecture and your drawings. I mean, you know, it's a collaborative effort on the part of many. And so I started thinking about this. I don't know, even just a couple of days ago, just thinking about that idea of how we all shape things.
Mm. Yeah, that as you were saying that, Jan, it just made me, like, the first two things that popped in my head were Anna and Mitchell's work, where, you know, whether you're actively shaping an environment, like say the, you know, sculpture installations that Anna's been a part of, or the landscape architecture that Mitchell does, or doing work like the project you were sharing, where you're, you know, you're not creating the environment yourself, but you're participating in it, is so much about, both of those are about creating the world around us and actively creating the world that we live in. But I guess to follow up here, thinking about all of that, Anna, I would turn back to you and just ask, you know, with either of these large scale sculptural installations you've worked on, have there been any times where you've had, you know, someone come to the installation and have a response to it that's really surprised you, or that's perhaps, you know, built a connection for them that they shared with you, and, you know, that struck with you or stuck with you in a certain way?
Well, the first exhibit went up basically when we were still kind of in COVID, and it also was in East Boothbay, which geographically is kind of obscure. So I talked to friends who went up there, and probably I don't remember, there were some good comments, but I have a comment that the educational director said to me recently at the current exhibit at the Maritime Museum, and what she said was that they've been bringing in groups of school children from schools all over Maine, I think, come in there and they learn about what we've done with the exhibit, the art, the science. And she said that at a certain age, she said, I think it was from age, you know, about 5th grade through 8th, that a lot of these students just, they would not want to leave the space. They just like, it's an immersive exhibit. So you're actually underwater. You're in Cash's Ledge, this amazing underwater mountain range that's about 80 miles off the coast of Portland. And we're trying to help permanently preserve this place. And you're there, you've got a kelp forest, there's lighting, there's projections, and that they just don't want to leave. And their parents have to kind of drag them out. So I thought that was a good comment. But it's only been open a short period of time, so I'm sure I'll collect some more comments.
Yeah, that's a really good one. It reminds me of, I worked at an art summer camp for a couple of years, and there were just multiple times every summer, there were always reactions from kids in that same age group who had this realization of like, wow, like making art and making these, you know, interactive installation pieces is just like one of the coolest things I've ever done. And it opened their eyes a little bit to like, wow, I could do this for the rest of my life. Like, this is so exciting.
And that's what we're trying to inspire people. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, it sounds like you are. Mitchell or Jan, did you have anything to add to that theme? Just the ways that people interact with your work and the space and reacting to the themes that you work with.
Well, one comment I just wanted to make was that it's sort of like a reaction to myself. I mean, the drawing in recent years has become almost like an act of trespass or rebellion, basically against my iPhone. And you know, those hours or 2 a day I'm out drawing, you know, is like, you know, that's a very valuable time for me, and it's a way for me to sort of communicate to myself and tell myself that, like, you know, I'm actually here and present and you know, and paying attention to this place. So, you know, so it's something I've communicated to myself about sort of the meaning, how it's meaningful to be engaged with this place. And of course, I've had many wonderful dialogues with my friends, colleagues, clients over the years on, you know, hundreds of projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the self is undoubtedly important too, though. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, I just think about doing a different project out on Long Island at Fowler's Beach with kids, a school group that watched the king tide come in, and they wrote little notes to the king. And one of them said, "Does the king have a queen?" And I always remembered that. and then actually this artist collective that I was part of at that time, that was called the King Tide Party, we did like a Queen Tide celebration after that. So we thought, well, we've been looking at the high tides, we don't look at the low tides, and we called those the Queen Tide. And then so it all came from that little kid's comment, which I thought was really great.
That is really great. I think I'm going to turn over to some questions from the audience now. So we've got, the first one is, oh, this is a good one. This audience member is wondering how you as artists, are you able to both find joy in your art making and creating, while at the same time you're all dealing with some really heavy subject matter at times when you're thinking about change and climate change? Is that something that you find fuels your practices, or does it challenge you and, you know, maybe repress your practice?
Well, go ahead, Jan, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that you can get fatigued for sure if you're dealing with climate issues, or many social issues are connected to climate issues, and there's a kind of compassion fatigue that can happen. And I think, but that being said, I usually feel uplifted. I feel like there's some kind of wisdom that comes through all of this. Even when things are starting to implode, I somehow still get energy from working in the environment and with people.
Yeah, I totally agree. Those two things.
And I guess for me as well, there's these, those big heavy issues, right? But I guess I find the way I sort of work across disciplines, either teaching or drawing or recreating or designing, it sort of works different muscle groups and it keeps me engaged. And so in some ways I feel stronger and not fatigued because I'm like working on different levels, and it just keeps me interested and on my toes and constantly sort of learning. And so it's good to sort of be the student, is the perpetual student.
This next question thinks about, we live in Maine, where there is, I think, as Jan was noting with Long Island, but also the entire state, we get a big swing in population in the summertime. And one of these attendees was saying that through their work, they meet tons of visitors every summer who have never been to the ocean. And they are wondering, how do we capitalize on this opportunity, someone's first visit to the ocean, to educate with regards to climate change and ocean health?
That's a hard one, right? Because most people think the water here is freezing. They can't even imagine how warm it is. And yeah, that's a good question. I think how do you combine like tourism with by like didactic environmentalism? I'm not sure exactly how you go about that. I think it always just comes down to somehow allowing people to sort of have access to stories that are taking place here, stories of people what are doing. So if there's this way for people to sort of mix and mingle with locals that are involved with the water, that's really I think the best way to build that bridge and develop awareness. Otherwise, it can be like a half-hearted effort sometimes.
One thing I think they can do is when they're renting a place or something and they want to have their lobster dinner, which when you live here, you hardly ever have lobster, but when people come, you go out and get some lobster, is to, instead of getting it in a store, to go find a local lobsterman who, in most of the peninsulas here, you can go and find somebody, even the smaller operations, and go and talk to them and order the lobsters from them, and then talk to them about their work and what's going on in the water. That's a way of trying to get to know some people and also the environment.
I couldn't agree more. It's to make those real connections with people who live here, and to show people the real thing, right? And I think there are a lot of ways that can be done. I think it's a really exciting thing to think about, and it's because it benefits everybody when it's done well. When tourism, let's say, is done well, it really benefits everyone.
This next question just really starts with some inspiration. This person is feeling very inspired by the work that all of you shared, whether, Mitchell, it was your personal rebellion to your iPhone and your daily drawings, Jan, your walking project, and Anna, your collaborative work. Just saying thank you for that. And they're wondering, what forms of collaboration are each of you most excited about pursuing for the environment's sake moving forward? Which I think, all of you have ongoing projects, but what comes to mind when you hear that?
I have one. I'll be in Greenland in June with my fellow collaborators, and we'll be doing a trek there in South Greenland, in an area that one of my colleagues has done a remote sensing vegetation study of this area. And so we'll have boots on the ground, and we'll be looking at what's actually on the ground, so that we can compare that to the LiDAR images of the changing vegetation. And that's of great significance to the sheep farmers there, because that tells them something about where they may be grazing their sheep in coming years. So there'll be a trek, and then we'll also work with the community there to do another collage workshop. So it's just this way of being in the environment with people who live there and us as people who don't live there, learning more about what's happening there, and then doing something in that environment and then processing it on site.
Great.
I have a whole bunch of different collaborative projects happening right now with people and communities. But the one I showed you briefly up at Little Ford Island, that's been really important to me because it combines sort of my lifelong passion for Robert Smithson and my interest in the coast, and so that project right now is an unfolding sort of music project with the musician Lee Ronaldo out of New York City, and we're making those field recordings there and then taking them down to New York City to process them in the studio into these sort of soundscapes, ambientscapes that'll be released on a record. So to me, that's an interesting project because it combines so many of my different interests and sort of reaches back to like my teen years and interest in music and things like that. So I'm excited to keep working on that project and see that come to fruition in the next year or so.
That's great. Those are so great. My focus this year, I think, will be connected with the exhibit that we have up right now. And there's going to be a lot of programming that the museum has set up that will, with the effort being to try to connect the fishing organizations with the science and the ecological organizations. There's a lot of rancor, or there's a lot of very difficult subjects going on now in the Gulf of Maine that have to do with the North Atlantic right whale, with the entanglements, with the fishermen, with the windmill projects. And I am hoping that the more we can open up these conversations between these groups, that somehow through this art project and just thinking in a different kind of way than has been thought of before, perhaps, that through the conversation, we can maybe find some things in common, because I think all of us care about this body of water as a symbol for all the oceans in the world. And I think that if we can talk more together, that we can move further. I mean, I guess this is true in general with our society. So, but we have this little situation here that I think maybe we could handle.
Definitely. Yeah, it reminds me of how just, art has this ability to take something that's really abstract and communicate it in a way that words alone sometimes can't. And hopefully that's something that happens there in the project you're talking about. This last Q&A question I want to ask you all is, this is, I don't know, I just think this is kind of funny. They're asking, in as few words as possible, what is the texture of water? This could be a stumper. Who knows? Does anything come to mind for you all?
Well, one of the things I can say is that I'm always trying to paint it in a different way, and so that's interesting because you're working on like it's a fictional texture to give either an illusion of it or a something unique so that somebody thinks about the water in a different way. I think the texture of it is, I don't know, that's really hard to describe.
That's a pretty wild question. I'm like, oh, it's like, it's wet. I don't know. It's like wet.
That's what I thought too. Wet, if that could be a texture.
I mean, for me, and this may not be what they're thinking. It's, after a long day and, the salt's dry down my skin and, I can sort of taste that or feel that, dryness. And, it's just, it's very evocative to me, and really sort of, that this sort of like it's on your body, and you can feel that, hours later after I've been in the water, that, there's that residue there and that texture on your body.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's something that is, so specific to being near a salt body of water. I think my final question for you all, this isn't from the Q&A, this is just as we start to wrap up the event tonight, do you have any projects that you want to share with people, or just a website link or anything where folks can learn more about your work?
Mitchell, were you going to say
Oh,
something?
sure. I'm just going to say the easiest way to sort of keep up with the different things is Instagram at Mitchell Rasor. It's just that's sort of the most up-to-date, sort of fluid, freshest, honest way to keep up with things.
Yeah, and I think there were some links to a website that I sent earlier to you all, Robbie.
Yeah, I think we're putting those in the chat.
Yeah, and then I will mention a show that's coming to the Ogunquit Museum in April that is called Shifting Sands, Beaches, Bathers, and Modern Art, and that's curated by Donna Cassidy, and I'll have a piece on that is about Long Island Drift in that show, along with other artists.
Yeah, I provided some links to our Gulf of Maine Eco Arts website, which actually has just finished the update for the show. So it's nice. It really reflects this particular show and also the previous one. And then I put some links for Maine Maritime Museum and Bigelow Lab, and I should add Conservation Law Foundation. I didn't put that up there, but that's a excellent. We've partnered with them for the last 4 years, and with this Cash's Ledge project. But just in general, they're an extraordinary organization. So that's another one I would add to the list that I gave.
That's great, thanks. Yeah, we actually Casco Bay keeper Ivy Frignoka is she came from the Conservation Law Foundation before Friends of Casco Bay.
Right.
So
I know Ivy. Yeah, she said that. That's so great.
we know them well. At this point, I'd like to invite our executive director, Will Everett, back on screen. And just my final words are thank you again so much for joining us tonight, everyone. This was a really great event. And yeah, it's been amazing hearing about all of your work and the way that you relate to water and Casco Bay.
Thank you, Robbie, and thank you, Anna, Mitchell, and Jan. And thank you to everybody who attended tonight. I hope Casco Bay continues to inspire you. If it does, there are 4 big ways that you can help us improve and protect the Bay. First, make a donation to support our work. The second thing you can do is to tell a friend about us. We're called Friends of Casco Bay for a reason. And you can help the Bay by having your friends, family, and colleagues become supporters of our work too. The third way you can help us is to become a volunteer. We're looking for more volunteer water reporters who help us keep an eye on the health of the Bay. We're putting a link into the chat about that, how you can sign up to volunteer. And thanks to a grant from the Ferris Olsen Family Foundation for Ocean Stewardship, we'll be launching a series of trainings for our water reporters beginning this spring and summer. So whether you're new or a longtime volunteer, be on the lookout for announcements of those. Finally, the fourth way you can help and be part of our work is to come to our big summer event. Mark your calendars. Friends of Casco Bay's members annual meeting is on Wednesday, August 2nd from 5 to 7:30 p.m. It's going to be held at Southern Maine Community College right next to Spring Point Light, which is the light that's right behind me in my image here, the lighthouse behind my head. This view, you'll have this view at our event on Wednesday, August 2nd. We'll be sending out more information about this event and all our events. But mark your calendar now, Wednesday, August 2nd at Southern Maine Community College. From all of us here at Friends of Casco Bay, thank you for joining us and good night.